Welcome back to Student Hub Live, Broadening Horizons Careers event. In this session, we are looking at innovation and enterprise. Super exciting subject, and I know that with lockdown, many people are now thinking about starting their own businesses. So if that's you or you know someone who is interested, then this session should give you heaps of ideas. And we want to allow loads of time for your questions in this session. I'm joined by three fabulous guests. I've got James Markey, who is the co-founder of Universal Simulation and an OU graduate. Now, James is really interesting because he won the student entrepreneurship competition for his most recent venture, and he's been chosen for the Santander Emerging Entrepreneurs Program to grow his business. Now, this is something ongoing and we'll fill you in on it later. But James, it's wonderful to have you here.
Hi, Karen. Thanks for having me
Hi.
here.
No, it's great. And we have Carol Sheriff, who is the teaching director of the OU undergraduate business program. And Carol has a special interest in leadership and entrepreneurship. She's run her own business for nearly 20 years and has worked with a wide range of small businesses and also social enterprises. So welcome, Carol. Fantastic to have you.
Very nice to be here, and hello, everyone.
Good. Thank you, Carol. And we have Michael Nagosang, who is a senior lecturer in management and teaching director of the OU postgraduate business program. Many people don't know that they can continue their undergraduate degree. So it's great to have you here, Michael. Now, your main research interests include teaching enterprise innovation and also digital entrepreneurship and women's entrepreneurship with a strong focus on Africa. So wonderful to have you, Michael.
Hi, everyone. I'm looking forward. Thank you.
Good, great. So let's talk lockdown, which is one of the reasons we can't all be in our studio today. There have been lots of positives to come out of lockdown, including being able to sit here with my dog all day. But how has this affected the world of innovation and enterprise, Carol?
Well, it's caused a lot of problems for some organisations, but it's a time of huge opportunity. And if you think about businesses around you, you'll see how they're developing. I had a rather nice experience we've got a very good garden centre up the road from where I live. And of course, the garden centre's had to shut down. So it had a cafe that sold organic foods. It was just a tiny sideline of what they did. But during lockdown, they saw an opportunity, a hole in the market to deliver to people's houses, baskets of organic fruit and vegetables. And now, of course, as lockdown is easing, they've now got two businesses. So, there are opportunities out there.
James, what have you seen happening in terms of the lockdown and how it's shifted things?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, it's new ground for all of us. But one of the things I've seen actually is it's opened up access to people that you might not have had before. So for me, it means I can actually phone up CEOs of businesses. I can phone up the deans of universities who are our customers and get direct access. I mean, it's not in the same way that you're selling, but the access in terms of being able to build and create relationships. And I mean, that's completely new because everyone's schedules, everyone's diaries are just freed up at the moment.
So you found that it's actually different in terms of people's workloads. That means that you're able to contact people, or have you just felt it's a bit different in terms of, I guess, how we're all, I guess, similar in some ways, and there's more of an equal playing field?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's just a case of it's disrupted our day-to-day life. So instead of getting distracted by what's happening in the office, you've got so many people now that are just free. They're at home and like they're looking for something to do, whether it's webinars, whether it's whatever else. But being able to just pick up the phone and get in contact with someone you might not have been able to get in contact with before. Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. Not necessarily my experience of trying to homeschool, but but yeah, some people do have different amounts of free time, don't they? Michael, what have you seen that's changed?
I think what I've seen is more improvisation and trying to value some simple solutions. I'm always interested in digital entrepreneurship around how all companies are thinking what's the best way to work remotely or to do things virtually, whether it's Teams, whether it's Zoom. But also, if you look at what's happening in the hospitality around the 2 meter rule, and when you watch on the news, you see some managers trying to see how the layout of their bars or restaurants might look like on a 1 meter and 2 meter, and just really valuing what's the simplest thing that can be done to keep business going and to make sure that everyone feels safe.
So we asked everyone at home how interested they were in starting their own business. So let's see what you all had to say. And then I'm going to go to you, Michelle. Oh, so we can see here that some people are not very interested, but some people have already got their own businesses here. Michelle, what are people talking about at home?
Well, we're still a little bit talking about the CV workshop from before. People have a few questions about that. But also people are talking about the fact that they've considered a change of career since lockdown and have started to think about doing things differently. And that will, of course, include a change of business for some people and being innovative in their businesses.
Brilliant. No, absolutely. I think sometimes whether it's a business idea or just a way of doing something different, there certainly does seem to be more of an entrepreneurial spirit around about that there are different ways of doing things, different ways to find a solution. We've also got a word cloud here. Which innovations do you wish you'd come up with? There are quite a lot I wish I'd come up with, including a thing that removes hair from the plug hole. I think that's the most brilliant innovation ever, a problem I constantly have with this mop of mine here. So this session is all about innovation and enterprise, but I wonder if we might sort of unpick some of those terms and think about what they actually mean and I guess how useful they are in terms of the context of business. Carol, what does innovation actually mean, and how do we know if something is innovative?
Yeah, that's such a good question. So I think of it as innovation is bringing something new to the world. But we tend to think of innovation as products, like the smartphone was a huge innovation, one I wouldn't have minded coming up with.
And there's me going on about hair, but anyway.
Yes, we
You'd
could
be
have
the
had a different
millionaire.
meeting. Yep. So we think about those kind of innovations, but of course there are innovations in services. And thinking about lockdown, a lot of hospitality has already been mentioned. A lot of pubs around where I live, went to takeaway, and so they do Sunday lunches. They're doing that as a takeaway. It's an innovation in service. But I think the thing to remember, if you're thinking about how you could innovate yourself, is it's also about a new way of doing things. So a lot of the apps that we see are actually a new way of doing something, and they become innovations and innovative. So I use a tracker for my steps and things like that. You could always do that, but now we can do it, linked to our phones, our computers, whatever. So that's an innovation in the way business is done.
And what about enterprise? Michael, can you give us a definition of enterprise and how that's different?
Well, I think enterprise, you can look at it in terms of a physical entity, say a business or a project or an organization. But enterprise is also about a mindset. So how enterprising can someone be? That might include the vision, new way of thinking, the boldness that comes with your approach to delivering projects, or the sort of vision and approach that you want to create within the environment in which we operate. So enterprise in that perspective can be looked at from these different ways. The physical entity, organization, a project that you are setting up to operate for a client, or also just the mindset and the spirit, the ambition, the boldness, the character that you want to set and within your environment or within your team for how things can be done.
Okay. And can I ask then, Carol and Michael, what your approach is then in terms of whether these need to happen together? Does innovation and enterprise always need to be linked? Carol?
Well, there isn't a sort of hard line on that. I tend to be of the view that you can be quite successful as an organization by following other people's innovation. So we'll go back to the smartphone. You know, what actually happened is Apple started and had to pour an awful lot of money and resources into making a smartphone. Now, a lot of its competitors then followed, you know, taking advantage of Apple's innovation, and could do it more smoothly, more cheaply because of, you know, following. Now, there are risks with that, which I think, given I know Michael takes a different view, he's going to show. But I think that is quite a legitimate way of, you know, organization. It's not just business, but organizational growth.
Okay, so Michael, what do you think?
Well, as Carol hinted, I'm taking a different view to say that organizations always have to be innovative, and there are different reasons because organizations, especially in the current climate, it's about risk, uncertainty, but it's also about results. What sort of results you want to get, and so when you put all of that into account, then if an organization really wants to grow, then they have to think of what's the best way to grow. And that thinking might be bits and pieces of tweaks here and there that makes you come out as sufficiently distinctive from competitors. So there is that notion of how do you stand out as well within the market, even if it's a niche market or even if it's a mass market. And then also sometimes if you are trying to attract the best talent, the best partners, or the best investors, then you have to find a way to demonstrate that you are innovative in terms of trying to create new value for the investor or for the partner or for the talent that you want to attract to work in your company. And so from that perspective, I would say innovation is always something that organizations should be actively seeking to do, whether it's at the level of the product, at the level of the service, at the level of the systems, or the way of organizing their activity.
Okay. And James, what do you think about this? Does enterprise need to be innovative?
I think for me it's such a big subject, and innovation enterprise is what you see day to day. When it comes to the practicalities of it, there's this lovely thing I learned when I was studying at the OU actually, the difference between exploring and exploiting. And it's something I come back to with my teams every week, you know, and it's the mix of the two, is that you can be exploring new technologies, creating something outstanding, but you can also be exploiting, like Carol was talking about, exploiting something that exists already, but you're making it better than it ever was. And to me, both of those things are enterprising, both of those things are innovation, just coming at it from a slightly different angle.
Brilliant. So we asked everyone at home what they wish they'd invented, and let's see what you had to say. Some really interesting answers coming up here. So the internet, yes, I think that's one key thing here. Also, WhatsApp, yes, we're all on that. Smart TVs, Windows, sliced bread, web chat, etc., Kindle. So lots and lots of super things there. I think I'm setting my sights a bit low here. So some really interesting ideas here. James, I wonder if you can sort of tell us about some advice you might give to people, because I think with this lockdown and things, many people are looking at different options, but a lot of OU students have caring responsibilities or disabilities. So very, very imaginative, creative people, but sometimes there can be very real restraints on time and access to the external world. So what would you suggest for people like that about ideas that they could come up for their own businesses?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think one of the biggest things for me is that your business, and I wanted to create a business for a long time and I never knew what to do. And I think for me, one of the huge things to realize is that the business you're creating is going to be an extension of you. So I think to know what type of business you should be launching is just to know what type of person you are. Because for me, everything I've done comes from two things really. One is passion, like what is it you want to do? What's going to get you up in the morning? What's going to make you see through all the hard things? And then experience. What have you done? What happens in your life that is going to make people, potentially your clients, give you confidence and trust you to do something? And I think once you look at yourself, what is it you're passionate about? What do you have experience in? You naturally find that business that you should be doing. So for me, I've always been passionate about technology, so virtual reality, haptics, the latest things. But I've always had experience in training people. So my first sort of pivot into that was using the training and then introducing the technology, which then eventually becomes creating a business for educational technology for universities. So that's my starting point.
And what about people and connections? Is it important to utilize people you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, this is where the pivoting comes from. So for me personally, my background was in managing retail stores, and I always wanted to create a business. So I took on a project. My first client was with Unilever, and it was to open up a store for them. So I did that project, but as part of it, I said, right, I want to try out this technology. So I used a 360 camera to record the training we did and then use that to deliver it. So it was part of the project that was based on my experience, but brought my passion in from like the side door, which then allowed me to take it to the next steps and say to people, well, my first client was Unilever, so now you can trust me. But that was based on my experience of what I was doing already.
Yeah, yeah. And it's also important to make sure that your product is fit for purpose and fit for market. How did you go about doing that, James?
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, it's about the little tests you do. It's a thing called minimal viable product. If you can come up with the most basic version of what you want to create, so you can take it to someone, you can test it, and you can see how they use it. And when you see that, when you see how they're using what you've created, you can see what the next steps are. And that's the thing, really, just doing it the smallest increment you can at the time.
Brilliant. That's wonderful. And it sparked a lot of discussion. Michelle, have you got some questions for our guests?
Well, we had a little bit of a discussion about innovation or don't innovate, and I think a lot of people would be unhappy if they changed the special sauce recipe again. So there's a place and a time for innovation, and definitely. Graham thinks that there's a good market now for wearable tech for health purposes, which is a great idea. And then we got a
Yeah.
little sidetrack. Leanne said that she wished that she had invented Animal Crossing, and I showed my ignorance and said, "What's that?" And she said it's a video game that her kids are supposedly playing, but actually she really is playing. And I said, bring back Frogger, because that for me was an absolutely brilliant, fun game when I was younger. So there's some questions about, some ethical questions coming up around innovation. And then there are a few points around, okay, within their own specific areas. They're not quite entirely sure what they come up with. But I suppose that's a point to the experts on the panel today. You don't have to have a specialist area to come up with something. It can be out of your field and you can develop that, can't you? It's the idea as a starting point.
James, what's your experience of that, in particular working within the competition?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, like I say, my background, I had a long career, about 10 years in retail management. So it was very general, just looking after teams and selling things in a retail environment. And for me, now I've started a business that's very much linked to technology, very much linked to educational, working with universities. So I think you can absolutely do something that's completely out of your field. But like I say, it comes back to that passion. It's really, is it something that you can impart on someone and they can see that you're the person they should be coming to?
Yeah. So it's something that you've got to live and breathe and be super excited about, not necessarily something that you're already in. So that's a brilliant response to that. Carol, now this whole idea about working for self, and we were sort of talking about disabilities beforehand, is very, very liberating. We've got a video clip here from a colleague at Ignite as well. Would you like to introduce that?
Yes, one of the points that I was making is that part of your passion can be about you. So if you do have disabilities, they give you very, very good ideas for your new business. And I think this is showing exactly that. So using some of your own background and knowledge.
Brilliant. Well, let's take a look at this very short video.
So this is the single most important thing that I can tell anyone who's starting out a business. Talk to potential customers before you do anything. Don't talk to your friends and family. They like you. They're not going to want to burst your bubble. So kind of get out of your soft circle and talk to some real people who might buy your product and service. You could talk to one a day for 2 weeks and all of a sudden you have sort of 10 different opinions on it. It's important that when you talk to them, you do learn how to conduct a customer interview. I kind of have 3 tips around that. I think one is talk to them about their current situation. So not about your product or anything like that. Talk about what their life is like at the moment, their experience, their struggles, and really understand how their day operates. The second thing is be specific. So ask about specifics in the past instead of sort of generics or opinions. So when was the last time you did X as opposed to what do you think about it?
Oh, sorry.
And the final thing is talk less and listen more. You're not going to learn anything unless you shut up. The more you are talking, the worse you are doing. So again, on the back of all this stuff, just keep records and notes. You'll start to find patterns and understand where the right opportunity is in the right market. If it kind of emerges out of this that this is not a real problem, don't worry. Kind of revisit your market segmentation from before and start thinking about a different approach and entry.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Carol. And we've got some resources in the chat that students can find out more about from that. So we've asked a question about social enterprises and which companies are social enterprises. So we've discussed various things before, but I'd like to turn to this whole area now. I mean, many students are passionate about things like their own community and giving something back. And social enterprises are one way of doing this. So can we sort of talk about what social enterprises are and also maybe some tips that students might need to know about if they were interested in setting one up? So Michael, can you give us a bit of an overview about what a social enterprise is?
Well, a social enterprise is an organization that undertakes activities. I'm going to use business activities in the case of this illustration. But the main difference is that they are not there to make profit for the owners or the person who created them. They are there to create value for the benefits of society or community. And so in many people's mind, a social enterprise is a charity or a not-for-profit. And I think there is a clear distinction between those two in the sense that a not-for-profit or charity simply provides services and profit is not a part of their vision or interest at all. A social enterprise is profit making. Then the question is what you do with that profit. And so the aim of that profit is either it is reinvested for the purpose of sustaining the organization to continue to create social impact and benefit to society, or to reinvest the profit for social purposes. So if you think of a cafe that is running as a business, but the main objective is to fight homelessness. And so they work with people in the street, take them out of the street, train them, give them jobs within the chain of cafes, put them on a very good, at least minimum wage salary, and start to transform their livelihood. So although that enterprise is operating as a profit-making organization, that profit is being used to deal with homelessness issues. And similarly, you have, I did some work on an organization which was an orphanage. And then they created a car wash business beside. And so the orphanage is a charity. And the car wash is a company that actually makes profit. But all of that profit is used to run the orphanage. And because the car wash is located in a very tourist attraction, it means that they start to attract many customers because tourists are passing by and they are focusing on the mission and the message behind the car wash. And what the social enterprise was telling us was that over time, some of those tourists, when they go back to their countries or the different parts of the country where they come from, are sending support, sending equipment and sending donations to sustain the activity of a social enterprise.
Excellent. It's interesting as well, isn't it, that when we asked people what they wish they'd invented, many people said the internet. It was the most popular thing, but yet that was initially set up as a not-profit initiative, and how it's changed the world. Now we're nearly out of time. I just wanted to end by asking for your advice for students, because in the middle of a global pandemic at the moment, it's a very, very volatile environment. So while there are opportunities, it also is a challenging time to maybe think about setting up a business. So what advice can we give to students who are thinking about setting up businesses at a time like this, or just generally in volatile times? James?
Yeah, well, I mean, going through exactly that same thing ourselves, we started up in November last year. And I guess it's a great time to start a business, funnily enough. But the point of it is that you just need to create it so that it's so nimble that it can't fail. I mean, we started this on a budget of £100. We keep track of all of our expenses, and you just keep it so small that you're going to survive. And it doesn't matter at what point you start ramping up and you take on more sales, but that you can use this time just to build relationships and keep the business going, because the situation, the economy, everything else will improve over time. That's a certainty.
Brilliant. And Carol, some final words from you, advice for people setting up businesses in volatile times.
Yeah, I agree very much with James. You've got to have a passion for something. There are a lot of opportunities caused by what is a huge change in the way things are done. But I think you also have to respect the situation. So for me, you've got to be quite sensitive about how you talk to people and how, you market your product. You must remember that, this is a terrible time for lots of people. And if you can help them, that's wonderful. But you must pitch it in that way, if you see what I mean. There are some really quite insensitive ways of selling. Whereas when you think about some of the angles on mental health at the moment, they're done very sensitively. They appreciate the situation people are in. And in my experience, that works much, much better than, kind of hard sell at the moment.
Brilliant. Thank you, Carol. And Michael, just very, very briefly, because we're super over on our time, what would your advice be?
I'll just add to what Carol and James have said around get a support base around you, people you are able to talk to or to just fall back on in case you fail, because this is complex time and we have to be prepared and be realistic about the possibilities. And so having friends, families, and contacts around that can support you and just give you even if it's the emotional support that is needed, can make a difference as well.
Really good advice, because of course not every business initiative is successful, and we learn a lot from our failures. In fact, most of the very successful entrepreneurs have had very failed businesses initially, so it is part of that learning experience. So James and Carol and Michael, thank you so much. That's been such an interesting session. I'd just like to end by just highlighting, Michelle's going to put a link in the chat for people who are interested in the OU Entrepreneurship Competition. I was involved in some of this last year, and it's such an amazing initiative. There's a variety of things there. You get so much help and support in terms of processing your application for it, thinking your ideas through. It really, really is brilliant, and I'm sure James would absolutely advocate doing it. But what is great is that you can look at videos of other students who've been through that journey, learn from their experiences, etc. So do check out the page about the competition and see if you'd like to enter it. I'd really recommend doing so. Okay, that's all we have time for this particular session. We're now going to show you a short video, and then I'll be back to talk assessment centres with Justin and Chan. See you in a minute.